Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, I am Mariana and I interview the brightest minds of physical therapy. So if you want to increase your knowledge, start right now by subscribing to this channel, clicking on the bell so you don't miss anything, give us a thumbs up and share this video with your friends. Today, our guest is Cora Aytona, and she's going to talk about how to improve patient outcomes and compliance using MDT. Cora became diplomated in the McKenzie method in 2002 and became part of the McKenzie faculty in 2006. In 2015, she became a senior faculty for the Institute, and in 2019, she was appointed to the McKenzie Institute USA Board of Directors. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, Cora. Welcome to PT Pro Talk. How are you today?
I am doing good. Hi, Mariana. I'm very excited to be here. It's an honor. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for accepting my invitation, and I'm very excited to talk about MDT today. So let's jump right in. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and how did you get to where you are right now?
Yeah, that's a very profound question, but I'm going to do my best to keep it short. Just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm a physical therapist, and I'm currently based in Hope Mills, North Carolina. If you don't know where that is, that's about an hour and a half south of Raleigh. I'm originally from the Philippines, by the way, but I moved here in 1994, so I've been here in the United States for almost 26 years, or actually over 26 years. So I've been here more than half of my life. So I did my Doctorate of Physical Therapy in Florida, University of Saint Augustine. And I remember right after I got out of school, so just in the beginning of my career, my goal was to accumulate as many tools in the box as I could. So I was out there taking courses, mostly manual therapy. So I was really thirsty for knowledge. But then I became increasingly frustrated with what I was doing, to be very honest with you. So, because I felt like I was doing exactly the same thing to every musculoskeletal problem that walked in the door. So all of my back patients, my neck patients got pretty much the same treatment, and some got better, some didn't. So it wasn't until I met somebody who was actually certified in McKenzie, and I was so shocked to see his outcomes. I was like, this guy is doing something voodoo, because he was getting patients better fast, and I wanted to learn. So that's what enticed me to go to my very first Part A course. And after that, it just really made sense to me. It's the simplicity in the assessment. I know some people might not think of it to be simple, but for me, it really made sense. So I ended up doing my credentialing program. I went through the whole credentialing program within a matter of 1 year. And then the following year, I did my diploma program, and I never looked back. So now I'm a senior faculty for the McKenzie Institute, and I'm also a board member for the McKenzie Institute USA. So I'm very lucky, I think, to be here.
Wow, that was quick, the credentialing and then the diploma right after. So that's awesome.
Right. I was really I was very excited to do the McKenzie credentialing, because it made sense to me, and my outcomes changed. I'm not saying that it made me fix everybody that walked in the door. Obviously, that's not the reality of it, but it just put me on the right path, and it saved my career, because I almost changed profession early on, because I felt like it was really frustrating doing the hum treatment. You know what the hum treatment is? Hot packs, ultrasound, massage, and doing all that. So generic exercises. So now it just makes so much more sense.
Yeah, I think it gives us a completely different perspective about treatment. It's a whole new world that we find out with McKenzie. So
absolutely. Yeah, it is not as fancy as most. I'm not trying to make comparisons. I hate doing that, but I think most people don't find it sexy, right? Because we're not using a whole lot of gadgets, but you learn a system that makes it become the box that holds the tools. So I find, now this is something that I tell my students quite a bit. So it's not just a matter of acquiring the tools. It's knowing when to use the tools. And I think that's the biggest gift that MDT has given me. And I'm very happy to share that with others.
Yeah, very true, because it gives us this general idea, like the assessment, I think is so powerful, and even that's super simple, it's super effective. So yeah. So let's talk a little bit about education. So what are the key aspects in patient education using MDT?
And this is a really good topic. I think it's very important because as an MDT clinician, actually not just an MDT clinician, as a clinician, healthcare professional, patient education is probably one of the most important things we need to be able to address, right? So, and I tell my students and my coworkers that you can have an abundance of knowledge, like you can know a whole lot of things, and you can have the greatest set of hands and be very good with your manual skills. But if you do not know how to talk to patients, then your success rate is only going to be yay high. It really matters, in my opinion, what you say to your patients and how you educate them. I was just teaching a Part D course online recently, and somebody asked, is there room for pain science in MDT education? And I thought that was a really good question, because nowadays I think the world is kind of swinging towards pain science. You hear a lot about that. So there's this huge pendulum swing towards using pain science to explain a lot of conditions and to teach clinicians how to educate their patients. And I think there's room for pain science and MDT, because the key elements or the key aspects in patient education, number one, I think, is knowing how to explain the patient's pain source. And most of the time we use pathoanatomical explanations. Mariana, I was one of those MDT clinicians who was married to the disc model. You know, I mean, it's very difficult to get out of that. And I'm not saying that's wrong. As a matter of fact, I still use it. But then I realized over time that we really don't know what's happening inside that patient's back or inside that patient's neck. So in a way, it's kind of a lie, right? But and you got to be able to read the patient and know who to use that type of model to. And the majority of the patients are going to be okay with less pathoanatomical explanations. As a matter of fact, maybe it's less threatening to them, right? So explaining the pain source or the biology of the patient's problem does not have to be very tissue specific. So often I would just say the joints are notorious for going off track like a train that's derailed. And not all exercises are created equal, meaning some exercises are probably going to put that train off track even more, whereas other exercises might put everything back where it needs to be, and then you start reducing your pain and improving motion. So, and patients are willing to accept that, right? The only problem is if they come in and they've already been labeled, because most of the patients that we see in the clinic have been labeled. They've had some type of medical imaging, or they've been told you've already got a disc bulge. You ask them where your pain is, and then they say it's at L4, L5, or it's at C5, C6. So they already know what's going on. So in which case you may use the pathoanatomical explanation and maybe even use the disc model, but you got to be able to find ways to reduce that threat to the patient. So that's another key aspect, being able to reduce threat in that patient's head, because you don't want that alarm to be set off. So then you can talk about how there are common findings of degenerative changes, all these rotator cuff tears in completely asymptomatic individuals. Research will back that up, right? So a lot of times we tell patients, okay, it's just like having gray hair and wrinkles. You can have gray hair and wrinkles and they don't have to hurt unless you're looking at them, you know? So I say MRIs and the medical imaging findings are in general like gray hair and wrinkles. They can make you more alarmed when you're knowing it, but realizing some of these things don't have to be painful. There are going to be patients though who will not buy into that, you know, so they're still going to be very focused on their their imaging findings. So in that case, the best approach would be not to build a block between you and that patient. Okay, so because there's going to be that therapeutic alliance issue. So the biggest problem is when you start negating or arguing with that patient. Okay, this is not the problem. You don't have this, or you can get better, and they don't want to listen. So a lot of times it's not until you actually start to find movements that make them better. So I would say, okay, Mariana, you're here now. Okay, so I understand you have all these concerns, but let's just see if we can do something to help you while you're here. Do you mind if I just do my assessment, see if we can find some directions that might help? And hopefully the majority of your patients are going to be derangements. You're going to see over 75% of them will have directional preference. And once you find that directional preference, maybe 30 minutes or 45 minutes later, you ask that patient, how do you feel now? And they say, I feel so much better, right? You get patients like that. And what I would say is, well, guess what, Mariana, you are 30 minutes older now. You're 45 minutes older now. Your discs are 30 to 45 minutes more degenerative, but guess how you feel right, or what do you feel right now? And they say, I feel better. So then showing that cause and effect, not arguing, but being able to show them you can be older and be less painful. And then they just smile, right? So there are certain ways that you can assure patients and not have to be so involved in that pathoanatomical explanation. I think the other aspect also of patient education is keeping them active, knowing that movements are not harmful depending on which direction they're going to. Because a lot of people, not just patients, think that we are exercising just to get fit, but we don't realize that exercise can in itself be pain reductive. So I think being able to show that using cause and effect is really, really important. Establishing baselines, being able to identify what it is that they're there for. I think as clinicians, we are very focused on symptomatic mechanical baseline. So we ask them how much pain do they have. We look at their range of motion. What else do we look at? Neurological examination. But often we neglect the very reason why that patient is there. So I'm kind of like a genie to the patient. So I'm going to tell them, okay, if I were a genie in a bottle and I can give you 2 or 3 or grant 2 or 3 wishes, what is it? Or what are the things that you want to be able to see change today? All right. So now you just caught that patient's attention. So, and then going back and rechecking those functional baselines that they say they cannot do after you've done your repeated movements, I think is where that buy-in effect from patients come in. So I think those are really important aspects in patient education.
Yeah, for sure. And what I still find challenge is I had a patient that I don't forget. He had shoulder pain. And then I test his neck, and the neck made a change on the shoulder. And then I tried to explain him the connection, but I think for some patients it's really hard to understand that the pain from the shoulder can come from the neck.
Right.
And even that I proved him that his range of motion got better, just treating the neck, doing the before and after, he wasn't convinced, and he wanted me to touch his shoulder, to do something on the shoulder because his MRI showed something on his shoulder. So even though that he got better, he still wasn't satisfied. And even that I proved that his pain decreased and his mechanic improved, he didn't come back. He just like, I cannot accept that you're not going to treat my shoulder. So that's crazy. I think some people, it's really hard to tell them that. And I remember really clear, I like the McKenzie with these comparisons to try to explain to the patient the pain relation. And I remember José Liberato, our instructor in Brazil,
José, yeah, saying, I know José.
Yeah, and he was saying, you know, someone asked him like, so how do you explain that the pain is coming from the neck? He was like, very simple. I show like a shirt and just pull here and say, you see, when you move here, in your, like close to your neck. I'm moving on your shoulder too. So the tissue is right here. And he just tells like a story, something to, don't go into details, just do something simple to
Keep
try
it
to
simple.
show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's something very powerful from the method. And at the same time, I wanted to ask you, like, did you face a situation like that? Like, what would you do in this situation? Or is simple, like, we can gain all the patients. Sometimes they are not a good fit.
I have seen a few folks who are convinced that they're there for their shoulder. And I think that's one of the hardest part as a clinician, trying to screen the neck and then realizing this is actually cervical in origin, and then having the task of convincing the patient that the problem is not coming from their shoulder, but it's coming from the neck. But one thing that I tell people is that it is not your job as a clinician to convince the patient what the problem is, but it's the patient's job to convince themselves. So you got to be able to show that cause and effect. So the biggest thing that I would say is I would gather baselines with the shoulder. So I'm going to tell the patient, okay, do something right now that tells you there's something wrong with your shoulder. So they're saying, I can't lift. Okay, go ahead and pick it up. All right. Or I can't reach behind my back, or I'd give them something to lift, like a 2-pound weight. If they say I can't pick up even a couple of pounds, then I would just say, hey, I want to be thorough. I don't want to miss anything. And are you okay if I be thorough with you? And most patients are not going to tell you, I don't want you to be thorough with me. So, and I tell them, sometimes the neck can influence the shoulder. They're so close together, just like you said, Jose was showing that, right? So I say they're so close together. There are times when the neck problem can mimic a shoulder problem. So then I have them move their neck, and then I go back and tell them, okay, so go ahead and lift your arm now. Do that which hurt you. And then so I say, what did you just do that made your arm feel better? And which one did you move? We haven't done anything to your arm just yet. And they say, well, it's my neck. And so they start connecting it. So I ask a lot of rhetorical questions. I know it's crazy, but I do that with patients, because sometimes it's not until you ask a very simple question, what did you just do that made you better, that light bulb turns on. So that's my recommendation when you're doing patient education. Keep it simple. So I try not to argue with patients. Now, if they still don't want to buy that, then that's their prerogative. That's their choice. So, and I'd say, okay, then we'll take a look at your shoulder. We can add that, but maybe this is a good thing to do because you can see the improvement in your baselines.
Yeah, no,
and
for sure.
I've heard some clinicians just tell the patient, well, this neck exercise is a good shoulder exercise. So that's going to be part of your treatment.
And I think we learned this more and more over the years and with experience, and to try to change the way we talk to patients depending on the patient. So I had one time like a patient that was an engineer, and he really wanted to understand every single system on his body. So maybe talking more mechanically about your problem with that type of patient, it works better than trying to give like a simple explanation. So they want to know the details. So I think with the time you learn how to change your approach depending on the patient. So that's very important
right
too.
So you're going to have to give that type of education, tailor it according to the type of patient you're dealing with. If you're dealing with an electrician, you can use the circuit breaker. Okay, so it's like having a circuit breaker. You're turning something off there and it's powering off your arm, just simple things like that. I like that. So that's very good.
Yeah, that's something that the method does really well. So I love that part. So now, how can we improve patient compliance? I think that's another very important topic.
Yeah. So I think patient compliance improves with proper patient education. Again, going back to that cause and effect. So a lot of times you do not need to tell the patient what to do if they can see the effect of what you just gave them. But otherwise, you got to be very, very clear in establishing baseline. So I'm a big believer in having a do a pre-test before doing your repeated movements, and then going back and doing the doing the same baselines as post tests. Another trick in patient compliance is making sure that they understand. And then I got to tell you this, because I was notorious for doing this in the beginning as well. I was one of those McKenzie clinicians who would instill fear in my patients and against flexion. So I would tell them, okay, you do not ever want to flex. Extension is the way to go. This is your direction that reduces your pain. So whenever you flex, you're pulling yourself apart. So in the initial stages, that might be appropriate. But then now I'm realizing that it's really important when you give that instruction to stop something that is aggravating or offensive to the patients. For example, you've got somebody who's an extension principle responder. So when you give that instruction, I want you to do these exercises and avoid flexion, it's very important to caveat that avoidance is only temporary. Because then they start thinking, okay, this is something that I can't ever do or I shouldn't be doing. And then you're giving that patient an instruction to perform the exercise every hour, every 2 hours, and they get very just discouraged. It's overwhelming. And the patient is thinking, okay, am I going to have to do these exercises for the rest of my life? So I think to caveat and say, okay, this is just temporary. You are making an effort to be more comfortable in the future. It's an investment. Once your body is ready, we're going to go back to doing those things that you stopped doing. So having that reassurance, you're going to go back there. It's these things that you can't do now, that bending forward at some point, once you are healed, you're going to be able to go back and do them again. It's like wanting to wear high heels. When you sprained your ankle, you are not ready to wear those heels yet. But guess what? Once that sprain heals, you can go back and wear your high heels again. All right.
Yeah.
So things like that, I think that's part of improving patient compliance. So that way they don't get discouraged. They have something to look forward to. Setting expectations. So not just in derangements. I tell folks with your dysfunction patients, right? Those folks who have had long-standing problems that will need time or take time to remodel. I don't know about you, Mariana. These are the patients who often don't come back, right? So you see them for a few sessions and then they're going home hurting themselves. They never want to come back, right? Because they expect to get better and they don't get better fast. So I think having a good sit-down education with that patient, setting expectations, you tell them, okay, you're doing this because you're trying to remodel the tissues. You want to develop a longer, healthier tissue. Right now, it's going to hurt, but over time, within 3 to 4 weeks, so set expectations. Within 3 to 4 weeks, you should see measurable outcome. So they don't get too discouraged and they're more likely to comply. So,
Absolutely.
And another thing, yeah, you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%. If you don't tell them what to expect, they are going to get discouraged and not come back.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And the other, I think, important aspect of compliance is being very good at writing down what you ask them to do. So I'm a big believer in writing down home programs. And nowadays, I don't know if you do this with your patients. Nowadays, I'm finding that using their smartphones, if they have their smartphone, I would, and instead of writing it down sometimes, I'd have them take a video. So I'll take a video of their exercise. While they're performing their exercise, I do the video, and then they can just easily go back to that video and watch themselves exercise. So they're more excited to do that. And it's not a violation of HIPAA, right? Because they're using their own phone, as long as you're not using your own phone. So just little things like that, being clear with your instructions and using tools to be able to help that patient comply with the exercise program.
And I think that's very useful because sometimes they repeat and they say that they learn and understand, and then they go home and they do something completely different. So just to keep, and then they get back and they say like, oh, I'm not really better. And then you ask them to show the exercise and they're doing something completely different. So
completely different. So you got to be very clear. So little things like that, the nuances, and I'm sure a lot of folks are doing that already, but I thought it was it's important to emphasize that.
Yeah, for sure. And in your opinion, what are the key elements to improve patient self-management skills?
And we're good at that, right? As MDT clinicians, I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about MDT. And Robin was a strong proponent for prevention and self-management. So prevention ties into self-management, right? So we want to teach the patient to become self-diagnosticians. So they're not just passive recipients, because a lot of times we just tell patients what to do without clearly understanding why they're doing the things that they need to do. So I think being able to help that patient become their own diagnostician, understanding what the problem is and knowing when to do their self-treatment is very, very important. So I tell my patients during the time that they're coming to see me that they need to be able to detect early warning signs that they're about to have another episode of back problem or neck problem or whatever it is. So what's the earliest sign that you're about to have an issue? Stiffness, right? So most people ignore stiffness. So whenever you have just a stiff joint, you just say it's just stiff, and people let it go. But then I say, nope, it's a baby that's about to turn into a bad teenager. You got to nip it in the bud, right? So you need to start doing your exercises. So I tell them, you do your exercises preventively. So before it starts to hurt, and when it's stiff, you do it, and you do it reactively. When you do have the pain, you do the exercise again. So I think knowing when to do the exercises is really important in self-management. And the other is having the patient understand that there has to be a balance in life, right? So if we keep doing flexion, what's the average amount of flexion we do in a day? About 4,000 times a day, right? Or 4.9 hours according to a recent study. So 4.9 hours of flexion in a given day, and we're only doing 24 minutes of extension, if that. So some people don't even do extensions, right? So they're constantly in mid-range flexion. So there's that imbalance. So I tell patients, you have to learn to balance life between flexion and extension, and vice versa. If you keep doing extension, you never flex, you're going to have a problem as well. So I tell patients to apologize to their back. What's funny, Mariana, is I work in a very small town in North Carolina. And once in a while, when I go to Walmart and I'm in a rush, I try not to make eye contact, because I probably treated about 75% of the population in that area. So once in a while, I'd get patients from years ago that I've treated, and they remembered me, and they'd say, Cora, I saw you. I don't know if you remembered me, but a few years ago, I came to see you for my back. And the other day I was mowing my lawn, and I started having back pain, and I remembered you. I could hear you in my head saying you got to apologize to your back. And so I did my exercises, and I felt good. And he was thankful. And it made me feel good knowing that I made an impact. I think that's where your job becomes more satisfying, when you know you've helped somebody, not just for that period of time that they're coming in to see you, but even for the years to come. So I think, again, teaching patients to balance life and learning to apologize for that frequency of flexion is important.
I think that's one of the beauties of MDT is the self-management, the ability that we give the patient, the way that we empower the patient so they don't go back and depend on the treatment passively like he usually is. So I think that sets MDT apart, and I think that's beautiful. Like, as you said, you just saw a patient that years ago remember what she said and was able to deal and cope with his pain and problem and prevent crisis of happening. So I think that if we can do that, the impact we have in our patients' lives is just amazing.
And the cost of healthcare. It's pretty expensive to treat musculoskeletal disorders.
Yeah.
It's I think right now it's actually the most expensive one. I got to check, but it used to be heart problems, but now musculoskeletal disorders, the cost of treating those have become an immense burden in our society.
Top 3 for sure.
Yeah. If it's not number one, it's amongst the top 3.
Yeah. Well, so let's transition to our final questions. So do you have any resource of information that you recommend that you especially like?
I tend to use a bunch of resources. A lot of times I don't know if you've heard of MDT Forum through LinkedIn. So it's a group of clinicians who are very passionate about MDT. So it's a great place to gain knowledge and also be able to share your knowledge with other MDT clinicians. Otherwise, I read some journals, like I'm a subscriber of JMMT and also JOSPT. So any materials or journals that I can get a hold of. Otherwise, I'd say networking with other clinicians, not just MDT clinicians, but keeping an open mind. We gotta learn, and we gotta keep growing. And listening to podcasts like this, I think, is a very good resource as well for clinicians. I would strongly recommend it.
Awesome. I am there on LinkedIn. It's very nice.
Yeah. And it's international. It's global. Isn't it? So
it's really important. Yeah. And what advice would you give to clinicians that are starting their careers?
If I could just tell them not to do the same mistakes. Don't make the same mistakes that I've made when I first started my career now. I mean, you got to go out there, explore and learn. But my biggest advice is to be more structured with your assessment. So it's not just about learning tools or gaining tools. You got to know when to use these tools. So I think that's one of the things that I really felt made me a better clinician. I'm still learning. I'm not going to say I'm the best clinician out there, but having that structure in assessment, knowing how to classify patients and understanding their condition is, I think, the biggest thing that we can learn as clinicians. So that way we can adapt the tools. So, because if you have the right classification, if you have a good understanding of what that problem is, then you're going to be able to put that patient on the right path and give them the appropriate tools.
Yeah, it makes everything easier once
Absolutely.
you identify. Yeah.
Yes.
And my last question, what personal abilities and qualities do you think are important to become a successful physical therapist?
Wow, you're just asking all these very deep and difficult questions. Let me think about that. Well, I would say one of the best qualities of a clinician is being curious. You gotta be curious. Robin McKenzie was a very curious clinician. A lot of our gurus, a lot of our scientists, researchers out there, one of the most common qualities that you can pick from these folks would be curiosity. You got to be very curious with your patients, genuinely be interested. We got to have that genuine interest in our patients, and patients will detect that as well. They know if you're interested in them. Having that curiosity will keep you learning. It'll keep you engaged, and it's also going to prevent burnout. It's so easy to become burnt out in our profession. So, but if you're curious, you're constantly learning, you're going to survive and be a better clinician, in my opinion.
Yeah, great.
So stay curious, Mariana.
It's good because every patient is different. So it's not something that we know we're going to face every day. So that keeps things more interesting. So it's always something different. I think that's what makes our profession so interesting. You never know what you're going to get, and you're always learning something new every day. So that's, great. Cora, thank you so much for participating. I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me today, talking about McKenzie. And for the ones that want to learn more about you and your work, do you have any contact information? that can
Yeah, so
reach out?
if you go to the McKenzie website, so my contact information will be there. So I have my email, and I think I do have the phone number on there as well. So feel free to um, go to the website, or I can give it to you and you can share it with your followers.
Yeah, I can put everything on the show notes so people can find it easier.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.